Phanteks managed to persuade me a few years ago that the P400 was the best mid-tower case on the market, yes, even better than the NZXT S340. But upon the release of the S340 Elite, I had to rethink my decision. Now in this video, we'll be comparing the two tempered glass versions, each sporting a unique color scheme. On the left, the NZXT S340 Elite, on the right, the Phanteks P400S Tempered Glass Edition. My conclusions might disappoint some, but after building in several mid-tower PC cases this year alone, I've got a pretty good idea of optimal design. The looks, however, are entirely subjective. So let's start with that. Neither of these differ in its original design, and that's a good thing. In fact, with the P400's glass window removed, you'd be hard-pressed to find any difference from its predecessor save the color scheme. The S340 Elite's newly added front-mounted SSD tray gives its new name away, but that's about it as well. You can currently buy the S340 Elite in white and black variants, while the P400 TGE is offered in a variety of color combinations. Something else you're likely to notice right away between the two, their textures. The P400 sports a glossy sheen, while the S340 Elite is wrapped in a matte finish. Frame build quality apart from this difference, though, is on point. Just remember that if you opt for the white variant of either of these cases, regardless of the texture finish, you will likely scrape up some paint and reveal that dark frame interior. But apart from this, my previous statement also applies for their concepts and interior designs. Both rely on an open form factor aesthetic, which seems to be the trend nowadays, and I don't mind. But while the NZXT counterpart boasts its iconic cable routing bridge to the right of the motherboard tray, Phanteks includes several storage tray mounting points. You'll have to remove these red covers to access them. We'll talk more about these a little later on. And while cables can be routed behind the S340's bridge, which is convenient to an extent, the P400 includes cable routing cutouts with rubber grommets. I personally prefer the cutouts because I can easily wrap around my 24 pin, whereas with the bridge it can be difficult to sculpt the dense wiring around the solid panel. You'll know what I mean if you actually build in one. To the right of these areas are the front fan mounts, another area where these differ. NZXT took a form approach, limiting the number of fans to two 120s or 140s. I've actually managed to fit a 280mm AIO in here as well by orienting fans on the front side, but it was cutting it close. This decision undoubtedly gives the frame a more fluid and cohesive feel, but at the expense of that 360mm radiator support, which is a large arrow to the knee for anyone looking to custom cool in this case, which I don't recommend. There's not a lot of room for it when all is said and done. The P400, on the other hand, takes a function approach, allowing for a removable front basement panel. In doing so, you'll be able to mount up to a 360mm radiator along with fans, and even have extra room for tube and reservoir support thanks to a removable hard drive tray down below. It's certainly the more custom loop friendly of the two, and this becomes more apparent when you look at the top of each case. Only one 120 or 140 fan will fit here, whereas space for two is available in the P400. Rad support is limited either way up top though, because there just isn't enough width for the cases to hold one closer to the left glass panels. Now both of these cases do have basements, which I love, but with the modularity up front aside, there are still a few key differences between the two of these. And in my book, the S340 wins here. Two SSD trays can be placed on top, followed by a single one on the side. I think this addition with the Elite is very cool and functional. There's also a cutout for VGA cables. The P400 lacks both SSD and VGA routing support via its basement, making it more of a form aspect than anything else, but at least it still has one. To the back of each, you'll find a few cutouts for HD audio and USB cables, front I/O, etc. You get an extra with the P400, but each is much narrower than the S340 equivalent, so these balance out. The backs of both of these cases are very similar save two qualities, and that's fan support as well as PSU mounting. Starting with the latter, both only support 120s, but Phanteks included vertical adjustment, while NZXT chose a fixed design. Not necessarily a nail-biter of a difference, but it is still there. For the PSU, Phanteks opted for the mainstream mounting design, PSU insertion from the right side, while NZXT opted for rear mounting aided by a dedicated bracket, and I much prefer this option. It makes the build process move by much smoother, and also looks a bit more dynamic back here despite not being able to see it. Other subtle differences carry over to the right sides of each behind their motherboard trays. The P400 sports two semi-toolless SSD trays to make up for what's missing up front. Remember, NZXT decided to place its trays atop the basement. Either way, you've got support in creative locations. Additionally, Phanteks included several Velcro straps to keep cables in check. NZXT added plastic clips instead to take advantage of the extra volume created by the cable bridge. But while this may appear to be the better option on paper, and this is where I'm sure a few of you will disagree with me. The bridge takes away from reservoir support and also isolates itself from a bulk of the cables at the end of the day. While it may look clean now, most of these smaller cables will have to be routed elsewhere thanks to the inclusion of a 24-pin, USB 3.0, SATA cables, it adds up. And because these clips can't be tightened, you risk having a cable or two poke out from behind the bridge. Don't get me wrong, I like the idea. I even like the implementation to an extent. It's not something I would take away, but it is something I would swap for rubber grommets. The cutout exposes the backside of the case where cables often go astray. I feel as though NZXT was shooting more for a function trait more than anything, but it ended up just being some aesthetic thing that they left as an icon for the S340 series. It's unique and works to a degree, but it'll crush your 24-pin, especially if it's custom braided, and expose the rat's nest behind most builds. Now, to knock on the P400 a bit, I get the idea behind the removable hard drive trays above the basement. It's a cool idea, but poorly implemented. Not because of how anything looks, I like the design and color integration, but let's be honest, it makes no sense in a case like this. No one buys a Phanteks P400 to stuff 6 hard drives into it. This is a mid-tower, and I'd much rather see this space utilized in some other unique way. I'll leave the rest of that up to the Phanteks design team, but alas, there are a few very tiny traits that still end up pushing the P400 TGE, are you ready for this, just a bit ahead of the S340 Elite, and it's the exact same thing that happened last time around and why the P400 won my wallet then. The most obvious of these is the integrated RGB lighting, and I know that that's been overused a bit, but the P400 does this in a subtle way, a very good way. The top of the case reveals this as well. You see, the NZXT S340 Elite boasts the usual headers plus VR leads, cool only if you have a graphics card with a dedicated HDMI port somewhere other than the rear. The P400, on the other hand, scraps this quality for a more functional approach. Fan, RGB, and reset controllers. Under the front of the top panel, you'll find 3 dedicated buttons, 2 of which control fan speed via a 3-way splitter and LED color. You also get an RGB LED strip to route anywhere you please. The reset switch, well, resets the PC, but it's still cool to have. I enjoy the looks of the P400s not only for their minimalistic designs, which S340s also sport quite well, mind you, but also for their seamless RGB integration, something that NZXT has yet to do with their S340 lineup. The power button cycles through the same colors that the included strip does, and there's even a small LED strip at the bottom of the case to illuminate the logo, and it also changes colors. These are subtle qualities, but enough to make P400s pop. Just ask any owner. Now obviously, your conclusions are entirely your own and justified in your own minds, and I highly doubt that I convinced any S340 Elite owner out there that their case is now inferior to the P400S TGE. I get that. But if you ask me today which case I prefer, it's the P400S TGE, and it's for a few different reasons, and it's not necessarily going to make sense for everybody, I get that, but for my preferences and what I look for in a mid-tower case, the P400S takes the cake. It wasn't an easy decision, and I'm certain I'll build in S340s in the future. I love the way they look, and how easy they are in which to build. But the P400 takes these traits a tad bit further, and adds a few of its own. Also, the way everything is so modular makes customization and cooling integration that much more available. Just look at how easy the front panel was to remove compared to the S340s. I won't look down on you for choosing the S340 Elite over the P400 TGE, but I might ask why. Is it the style, the color option, price? Of course, these are all preferential, and that's why nothing I say is set in stone. But in my book, Phanteks squeaked out a very narrow win. Very, very narrow. What do you think? Give this one a thumbs up if you thought it was cool, thumbs down for the opposite, click the subscribe button if you haven't already. I will catch you in the next video. I wanted to save this announcement I'm about to make for last because I know most of you usually turn off the video by this point. At the, right when you start seeing the thumbs up thing go up, you're like, okay, next video. So I will be building in the P400S. There's a reason why I didn't build in either of these cases for the video, but I'll be putting a custom loop together inside the P400S very, very soon, like within the next week or so. So stay tuned for that. Of course, it will be a Ryzen themed build because red is Ryzen, and I think it's gonna look pretty dope. This is Salazar Studio. Thanks for learning with us. I can't believe I just used the word dope in a sentence on YouTube.